Hey guys, welcome back to Based MMA. In this video, I'm going to be talking about McGregor versus Chandler and whether or not a Conor McGregor card needs to be stacked because, tickets went on sale for UFC 303, very expensive, of course. Everybody wants to go watch Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. It's an amazing main event. It's a very explosive fight. And, as much as both of these guys haven't fought in a minute, this is probably one of the most exciting fights you can make right now in the UFC. So I understand why the tickets are so expensive. But with that being said, does a Conor McGregor card actually need to be stacked in 2024, right? Because this is the card so far. They haven't added Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree, but so far that fight is a co-main event of Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, which is a little crazy in my opinion. In my opinion, it's a little crazy. And I'm going to be a little bit more positive in this video. I know that in my last couple of videos, I've been a little bit salty, but in this video, I'm going to try to keep it more positive. And look, I think Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree is a very good fight for UFC 303. However, I don't think it should be the main event. I mean, not the main event, the co-main event of Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler. I mean, we have Mayra Bueno Silva versus... I can't say that on YouTube, what I'm about to say. So I'm just going to be polite. Not a great fight. Cub Swanson versus Andre Fili. Okay, this is a good prelim. Joe Pyfer versus Marco Andre Barrios. This is not a bad fight. I like this fight, but it's not a great fight for the main card of UFC 303. And then we have Michelle Waterson versus Julian Robertson, which is most likely going to be a prelim for the card. So this is a card so far. Obviously, we still need a lot more fight announcements for UFC 303. I mean, the card is taking place on International Fight Week. So I do expect this card to be a little bit more stacked compared to some of the other cards with Conor McGregor, right? Because let's take a look at McGregor versus Cowboy. That card was atrocious, right? Obviously, the main event, Conor McGregor versus Donald Cerrone, it still sold a lot of pay-per-views. He was a minus 330 favorite, which is crazy, and the fight definitely turned out that way. And then the co-main event was Holly Holm versus Raquel Pennington. Terrible co-main event. It wasn't even for the title. And then the featured bout was this guy versus this guy, who I don't even know who that guy is. And then this fight was on the main card, which is absolutely insane. I mean, OD Osborne, he was the first fight on UFC 297. Brian Kelleher fought Cody Garbrandt at UFC 296 and was on the prelims. And then Anthony Pettis opened up the main card with a fight against Diego Ferreira, which is not the worst thing in the world. But just looking at this card, I mean, it was pretty bad. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I feel like some of these prelim fights were actually better than the main card. But yeah, obviously UFC 246, not a great card. And, I think a lot of MMA fans weren't really complaining, right? Because, I mean, it's Conor McGregor. You know that he's basically going to sell the card on his own. And if we're being honest, a stacked main card, a stacked card in general, like UFC 298 and 299, are not going to sell as much as a Conor McGregor card with these matchups that aren't that great. So Conor McGregor is such a big star that he could really carry a card on his own. Now, I know that a lot of new MMA fans, they look at UFC 303 and they're like, man, this is trash. Especially coming off UFC 300, especially coming off UFC 299 and 298. This card looks terrible in comparison, but I'm going to be honest with you, I'm still very hopeful for this card. I think that you could add two really good fights to the main card. Like if they add Colby Covington versus Ian Gary, as much as I don't think that fight would be as entertaining as some of you guys are making it out to be, I understand that the buildup would be fun with Colby Covington and Ian Gary, very, I guess, controversial fighters right now currently in the UFC. But if I'm being honest, like most of Ian Gary's fights are not that entertaining. And then we just saw how Colby Covington fought against Leon Edwards, which it doesn't really excite me to see Colby Covington back in the cage. But I understand that that would be a good fight to add for UFC 303 just because of the press conference, because of the buildup. And I still have faith that they're going to add that fight to this card. But maybe they don't add it, right? Because the UFC just announced the Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree will be the co-main event of UFC 303. And let's look at some of the other Conor McGregor cards in the past. Obviously, McGregor versus Poirier, the trilogy, that was a big fight, right? They were 1-1 going into that fight. The co-main event was Gilbert Burns versus Stephen Thompson. And honestly, This is not a bad co-main event at the time, right? Gilbert Burns was coming off that loss, I believe, to Kamaru Usman, Stephen Thompson. You know, I believe he had just beat Jeff Neal, if I'm not mistaken. Not a bad co-main event. It's not a great co-main event in my opinion, but the fight turned out to be kind of a snoozy. Tai Tuivasa, Greg Hardy. I think this is a good fight to have on the main card, right? You're gonna get a knockout. It's a heavyweight bout. Irene Aldana versus John Dos Santos. Not a fight in my opinion that really belongs on the main card. It is what it is. And then obviously Sean O'Malley versus Chris Moutinho. I think this is a good fight for the main card at the time. Carlos Condit was on the prelims. Nico Price versus Michel Pereira was on the prelims. Ryan Hall versus Ilia Topuria was on the prelims, which is crazy. Trevin Giles versus Dricus Duplessis was on the main card as well, which is absolutely insane that both these guys are now champions of their own weight classes. And I think that's kind of the approach they should take with UFC 303. Add a lot of like young contenders. Add like a Peyton Talbot. Add a Kyler Phillips to the card. Add an Umar Nurmagomedov versus Corey Sandhagen. Because I don't think the card needs to be super stacked. Like I said, McGregor versus Chandler sells itself. And I don't think that they need like a UFC 298 or 299 type of card. I think that if you have a really solid main card, the card will do amazing. And I think fans will be happy about it. I'm honestly not that mad about the card so far. But I won't lie, it definitely needs like 2 or 3 good fights on the main card. And I think I will be happy because like I said, look at these cards. I mean, they're not like the best cards. But obviously Conor McGregor, Poirier, that sells itself. You don't need a super stacked card in my opinion. Let's look at Poirier versus McGregor too. We had a great co-main event. Obviously Michael Chandler was making his UFC debut at the time against a Dan Hooker who went to war against Dustin Poirier. So this was a great co-main event. You know, the main event sold itself. And that's the thing with Conor McGregor, right? Like these fights aren't really the best. Joanne Wood was a feature bout of a Conor McGregor card. Absolutely insanity, especially now that you remind yourself that Joanne Wood actually opened up UFC 299 and she was a feature bout 2 years ago. I understand that she was probably higher in the rankings at the time, but still, man, crazy. Marino Rodriguez was on the main card at the time. Armin Strickland versus Matt Favola. Armin Strickland was on the prelim, so he was a contender at the time. Khalil Roundtree, right? He was on the prelims of the Conor McGregor card, and now he's co-main eventing against Jamal Hill. And that's a problem, right? I don't know why they haven't added Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree. It's going to be the co-main event. But my problem with Khalil Roundtree versus Jamal Hill is that it should not be the main event. I mean, the co-main event. I keep saying main event. It should not be the co-main event. And the reason why I lost it, where is it at? And the reason why I don't believe that Khalil Roundtree should be the co-main event of a Conor McGregor card is because it's not a big enough fight, man. I mean, Khalil Roundtree, he just fought at the Apex card like in December. Not a very big card. And I think that if they really wanted to add Jamal Hill as a co-main event of the McGregor card, then make a fight against Yuri Prohaska. I think Yuri Prohaska versus Jamal Hill would be a great co-main event for McGregor versus Chandler. And then maybe the feature bout could be Colby Covington versus Ian Gary. And then you could add Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov. Maybe add a fight with Diego Lopez. Add Kyler Phillips on the card or Peyton Talbot. I think you could add a lot of these young contenders to the McGregor card. And I think the card will turn out just fine. But like I just mentioned, I just showed you guys, these McGregor cards are not really the best. Obviously, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor was one of the highest, if not the highest selling pay-per-view ever. And look at the card. It wasn't that great of a card. I think it had a great co-main event in Tony Ferguson versus Anthony Pettis. And then you had Dominic Reyes at the time, who was ranked number 12. You know, so it wasn't really like that big of a fight. Derek Lewis versus Alexander Volkov. That was a great fight. Actually, this was a pretty solid card. Michelle Watterson was also on the main card. So if you look at Vicente Luque, Jalen Turner. So yeah, obviously these cards aren't all that great, especially in comparison to the type of cards we get these days. But if I'm being honest, guys, UFC 298 to 300 was a little bit of an anomaly. Like, we don't really get those type of cards that frequently. And I think as MMA fans, we've kind of gotten used to those type of cards. And then when we look at UFC 303, we think, oh my God, this card is trash. But honestly, the card isn't all that bad. Like I said, I think if they had Ian Gary versus Colby Covington, you had a Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov, you had a Kyler Phillips versus Rob Font, I think the card could be pretty solid, man. And like I said, Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler sells itself. It's just about the UFC selling this fight correctly. Because if I'm being honest, guys, I don't think people are as excited about Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler as they were a year ago. And I think part of the reason why is because we've been waiting for this fight for so long. We've seen how Conor McGregor has been outside the cage. We know he's not really taking the sport seriously. We're kind of tired of Michael Chandler waiting in the wings and basically not fighting for 2 years. And then the way the UFC announced this fight to the world was anticlimactic. Like to announce it right after UFC 300, reading it on a piece of paper, I know that I already mentioned this, was so anticlimactic. Like when your biggest star is returning to the UFC, you want to make a big splash. You want to put a big promo after UFC 300 before the main event and really get the hype again, right? Build that hype again. And I feel like, I don't know if the UFC has gotten kind of lazy with promotion and marketing, but they need to do a good job of really selling this fight. Like I said, Conor McGregor is such a big star. And then Michael Chandler is one of the most exciting lightweights. I think this fight is going to sell very well, but I can't lie. For a card for International Fight Week, I still think they should try to add two big fights to this card. Like, they don't have to be the most massive fights or any title fight whatsoever, but if you add, like I mentioned, an Ian Gary versus Kobe Covington, a Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov, and you put a lot of these young contenders on the card, I think the card is going to do very, very well. So does a Conor McGregor card really need to be that stacked in 2024? I don't think so. I really don't think the card needs to be all that stacked, but I can't lie. I do see that narrative right now online of people being mad because the card isn't looking all that great. But if I'm being honest, I don't think it needs to be stacked. I really don't think a Conor McGregor card needs to be all that stacked. I think the card is fine so far. I hope that a lot of these fights are on the prelims. Maybe one of these fights is going to be on the main card. Maybe Joe Pyfer versus Barriot is going to be on the main card, which I really don't have a problem with. But if I'm being honest, like Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree is not a good co-main event. It's a good fight, but I would be a lot happier if that fight was like the feature fight, the feature fight, and then the co-main event is Gary versus Covington, and then you add like a Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov, right? You add a very high level fight to the card. So yeah, guys, those are my thoughts on UFC 303. Let me know. Do you think the card needs to be stacked? Do you want it to be like this massive card? Are you expecting like a UFC 298 or 299 type of card? I'm not really expecting that, which is why maybe I'm not as disappointed as some of you guys. But like I said, I think this card is going to deliver. I think if they add one or two more fights, right? Because right now we only have one, and then Jamal Hill, Khalil Roundtree, which they haven't added to the website. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you only have 6 fights, so we still need a couple of fights. We still need like 7 fights added to the card. So don't panic just yet. I think the card is going to be just fine. And like I said, I'm not really expecting like this massive card whatsoever. I'm just expecting a very solid card with maybe 1 or 2 very big fights. A solid main card, not like the best main card ever. I'm just expecting a solid main card with typical type of prelims, right? That's basically what I'm expecting. So let me know what you guys think. Are you guys disappointed with UFC 303? Are you disappointed that Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree seems to be the co-main event of this card? And maybe that means that they might not be adding Ian Gary versus Kobe Covington to the card, or maybe they will add it to the card, but it's going to be the feature fight. We really don't know so far. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.